Hey guys, tonight we unroll a mat of camel hair beneath your aching spine, wrap you in the sour warmth of a travel-stained cloak, and wake you up in the middle of the 13th century, 1253 to be precise. You're not in Paris, you're not in Baghdad, you're somewhere between Tabriz and Karakorum, in a Mongol caravanserai that smells like cinnamon, damp leather, and desperation. The walls are packed dirt. The pillow is your saddlebag. The man snoring beside you is hugging a bale of peppercorns like it's a teddy bear. You are a spice merchant in the Mongol Empire. Congratulations. You're middle class, which means you're one step above poverty, one step below being executed for tax evasion, and precisely in the direct line of every horse-born tax collector on the steppe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it now? Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're awake because your back has finally given up, pretending the camel furs are soft. It's still dark. But morning in the Mongol world doesn't wait for the sun. It waits for the yurts to start snorting and the horses to start peeing. You blink toward the oil lamp sputtering in the corner, brush a grain beetle from your ear, and start mentally calculating your remaining nutmeg bundles. That's not insomnia. That's inventory anxiety. The caravanserai is packed. Not with tourists. No, with exactly the kinds of people you want near fragile cinnamon sticks, sweaty traders, twitchy guards, loud gossips, and one very unsettling old woman who bartered her way here with 30 pounds of dried mushrooms and rumors about the Khan's astrologer. You rise carefully. Your left hip is currently owned by arthritis, and your right ankle makes a popping sound when you pivot. These are the side effects of professional travel in a world where suspension means tying extra rope to your ox cart. Your first task, repack your goods. The Mongol world runs on movement, and so do you. Sacks of black pepper from Kerala. Clove pods, so fragrant they might attract bees or burglars. Frankincense from Oman that you didn't even mean to buy it, just came with the camel. You step outside and are instantly hit by cold air so dry it could desiccate your eyeballs. Your nose bleeds politely, as it often does. Someone's burning dung for breakfast fuel, which adds a lovely smoky fecal note to the ambience. You sip from a goatskin flask of yesterday's fermented mare's milk, which tastes exactly as bad as you remember. The caravan master is already awake, shouting about wheel repairs and cursed wheelsmiths. His horse, named Garlic, is foaming at the mouth, not from illness, just existential dread. You nod to him. He spits in your direction. This is a compliment. You accept it gracefully. Today's plan, cross 40 kilometers of empty land that definitely won't be empty. Somewhere out there are wolves, taxes, tolls, and possibly a wandering monk who'll demand nutmeg in exchange for not hexing your camels. The Mongol Empire is big, truly big, and unified. Yes, but peaceful, only if you're armed, lucky, or invisible. A brief breakfast is brought over by a passing herder, a leathery triangle of dried curds and a lump of millet. You pretend to chew it. It pretends to be food. Trade is your lifeline, not cuisine. Real meals come at the end of long, dangerous weeks. Usually when you're too tired to taste the saffron you risked your life to carry. As you prepare to mount your cart and begin the day's haul, you notice a new face, a young merchant with a wide-eyed stare and 2 clean boots. You offer him a nod, a warning, and a piece of advice: always hide your best cardamom in your sock. He doesn't laugh. That's okay. Neither do most people until the taxes hit. Your cart jolts forward with the grace of a wooden coffin on wheels, and you're off into the beige oblivion of the Central Asian steppe. The sun hasn't fully committed to the day, but the sky is already accusing you of being behind schedule. You're a spice merchant, which means your entire life is defined by three things: dust, diplomacy, and diarrhea. All three will feature heavily today. The Mongol postal system, the yam, is famously efficient, which is great if you're a royal courier galloping with a message for the Khan. You, however, are hauling sacks of turmeric and a barrel of dubious dried apricots. You get no fresh horses, no imperial blessings, just the warm joy of navigating terrain that hates carts with every fiber of its rocky being. You pass a herd of shaggy yaks. They're blocking the road, because this isn't really a road. It's a suggestion. You honk a guttural shout in Mongolian, and the yaks ignore you. You wait. The yaks continue chewing with the smug patience of creatures who know they cannot be rushed. Eventually, they part, slowly, pettily. Your driver, a part-time poet who hates rhyming, complains about the axle. Again, it creaks like it's possessed. You offer him a cinnamon stick as encouragement. He eats it whole and immediately regrets it. You do not sympathize. Lunch is a roadside miracle, a shriveled onion shared among 5 traders, eaten with ceremonial grunts and the sort of reverence usually reserved for religious relics. Someone offers yak butter tea. It's hot, salty, and has the texture of regret. You sip anyway. Warm is warm. As the cart trundles on, the land shifts. Sand gives way to grassy hills, which give way to craggy passes. Somewhere up there, a nest of bandits debates whether your cargo is worth ambushing. You hope they vote no. You also hope your guard, a man named Bat, is actually awake under that fur hat. He's snoring, but it might be a strategic snore. He once killed a robber with a cheese knife, or so he claims. You've never seen the knife, or the cheese. Along the way, you pass a rest post guarded by an old Mongol woman with a bow, a beard, and more authority than any local noble. She eyes your sacks and demands a toll, 2 cloves, and a compliment. You pay? She grins. You live another day. By afternoon, the wind picks up. It's dry, sharp, and full of secrets, whispers from merchants long buried along this route. Their bones probably still clutching spice sacks like ancient love letters. You pull your cloak tighter. The only thing between you and oblivion is your stubborn optimism and a pouch of star anise. You make camp at dusk in a hollow, sheltered from the worst of the wind. The fire sputters into life. Dinner is more millet, this time with chopped dried figs, an extravagant treat that makes your traveling companions suspicious. You lie and say they're leftovers from the Khan's table. This impresses nobody, but it does reduce theft around the fire. Stories begin, half-truths about haunted oases, snake oil peddlers with actual snakes, and the infamous pepper heist of Nishapur. You pretend to listen. Really, you're mapping tomorrow's route in your mind, factoring in terrain, weather, and which settlements won't extort you too hard. As you settle down to sleep, wrapped in wool and surrounded by trade goods that smell better than your traveling companions, you let out a sigh. Another day survived. Another day closer to the markets of Samarkand, or maybe even Hangzhou, where the real money is if you don't die before you get there. Historians still argue whether spice traders had formal guilds during this period, or whether it was all word of mouth and mutual suspicion. What's certain is that your success depends less on market forces and more on your ability to look confident while lying about cargo weight. And your ankle still pops when you turn. That, unfortunately, is medieval economic realism. You wake to the glorious sensation of a scorpion exploring your boot. It's unclear whether it's alive, dead, or spiritually vengeful. But either way, you shake it out like a medieval maraca and decide that's enough rest for the day. Dawn on the steppe is cold, sharp, and aggressively beige. Your cloak is stiff with frost and smells faintly of mutton and fear. Breakfast is 2 mouthfuls of something that was once rice and now exists solely to disappoint. You chew slowly, pretending it tastes like luxury. Spoiler, it does not. There is no such thing as a Mongol Empire breakfast buffet unless you're a Khan, and even then. Your buffet may involve horse meat served 6 ways, none of them involving cutlery. Packing the cart takes an hour of bickering, balancing, and bandage adjustments. Your left thumb is still wrapped from last week's cargo slippage incident, a minor tragedy involving cardamom pods and dignity. As you lift the heavier sacks, you wonder whether medieval chiropractors exist. They don't. You settle for a good grunt and a hernia. You're traveling through caravan territory now, routes watched closely by nomadic clans and opportunistic middlemen. One man offers to sell you fresh silks that are neither fresh nor silk, unless silk is now made from goat hair and sadness. You decline politely and get a curse light hurled your way. Nothing lethal, just some vague misfortune for the next 7 generations. This morning's ride is uneventful, if you count choking on dust and arguing over navigation stones as uneventful. You pass through a checkpoint, a nomad runway station where a grinning man inspects your goods while chewing something that might be fermented yak ear. He charges a toll based on scent. Your turmeric triggers an olfactory surcharge. You consider objecting, but remember the man has a sword and a sense of humor shaped like a scythe. By midday, the sun has opinions. It beams down judgmentally on your hatless scalp. You improvise shade with an extra scarf, and the firm belief that heat stroke is a modern invention. Spoiler, it's not. Your driver is delirious from sun and poetry again. He composes a haiku about cumin. It's not good, but everyone claps. What else is there to do? You reach a trading post finally. It's part bazaar, part rest stop, part open-air philosophy, debate about onion prices. You spend the next 2 hours haggling over pepper. One buyer insists your pepper is cursed. You insist it's blessed. He counters by sniffing it dramatically and declaring it emotionally unstable. You offer a discount just to end the performance. Lunch happens in a tent that's half fabric, half illusion. The stew is watery and features something floating you choose not to identify. But there's bread rock hard, but bread nonetheless. You eat it gratefully, only slightly cracking a molar. You spend the afternoon performing what economists might generously call merchanting. You trade 2 sacks of cinnamon for bolts of cloth and something claiming to be a medicinal root, which may just be a painted stick. The spice game is, after all, half real and half theater. The trick is looking like you know which half is which. As the sun sets, you notice your guard bat is sharpening something with suspicious enthusiasm. He claims it's for wolves. You suspect it's for potential customers who argue about nutmeg. Still, it's comforting, kind of. You sleep in a guest tent alongside other traders, each clutching their merchandise like it's a security blanket. One man mutters about thieves. Another snores so violently you wonder if he's secretly a camel. You build a pillow out of sacks of cloves and your hopes for an uneventful night. Good luck. Historians still argue whether Mongol spice trade stops were regularly guarded or simply chaotic free-for-alls with spears. The truth, like your stew, is murky. But one thing is clear: if you want to survive this career path, you'll need more than goods. You'll need charm, grit, and the ability to lie about the medicinal properties of saffron with a straight face. Also, maybe a scorpion-proof boot. It's just before dawn when your cart breaks an axle. You don't know this immediately. Of course, at first, you just feel the shudder, hear a cartoonishly loud crack, and then witness your pepper barrels performing a synchronized dive into the dirt. One even rolls into a goat, who seems unimpressed. Fixing it requires 3 men, a hammer that doubles as a self-defense item, and a level of patience not commonly found among spice merchants with deadlines. You mutter curses that are mostly culinary. May your stew curdle forever is a favorite, and wonder why wagon parts weren't included in the trade curriculum. By the time it's patched together, you're already behind schedule, which matters, because today is market day in Karakorum, and you've still got leagues to cover before the place starts overflowing with merchants, pickpockets, and overly ambitious poets selling thoughts instead of goods. You sigh, squint into the rising sun, and start moving. The roads are theoretical. There's a path, but it's more a suggestion than a commitment. Ruts run deep enough to hide a medium-sized child, and the occasional carcass reminds you that not everyone survives the spice circuit. Some are trampled. Others are bored to death by the endless philosophical debates on whether nutmeg is truly necessary. Midway through the morning, you stop to water the oxen, or rather, you attempt to, before realizing the well is dry and guarded by a man whose job is to inform you, for a fee, that there is no water. You hand over a coin anyway. He smiles, hands you a pebble, and says hope. You treasure the sarcasm. Lunch is an affair of obligation rather than nutrition. You chew on dried apricots, which double as dental challenges, and sip from a water skin that tastes vaguely like old leather in defeat. Your assistant offers you a chunk of preserved yak meat, which turns out to be neither preserved nor particularly yak. But calories are calories. You finally reach the outskirts of Karakorum just as the sun positions itself for a dramatic descent. The city is chaos, wrapped in dust merchants yelling, horses defecating, and monks quietly judging everyone from a corner. It smells like ambition, manure, and fermented ambition. Getting into the central market requires a permit, a bribe, and a polite nod to the guard whose nose ring suggests a past filled with interesting decisions. You secure a small booth next to a man selling sacred mushrooms and a woman claiming her garlic can cure heartbreak. Both are probably correct, in their own strange ways. Setting up shop is a flurry of performance. You lay out spices like sacred relics, cinnamon sticks polished to shine, saffron threads nestled like newborns, and peppercorns that you pretend are rare when in fact they've just been kept out of the rain. Customers begin arriving almost immediately. They ask the same questions. Is this real saffron? No one knows. Why does your cinnamon smell like horse? It doesn't. That's just Karakorum. Can I get 3 pounds of cumin for a smile and a vague compliment? Depends on the smile. Haggling becomes an interpretive dance, complete with flattery, melodrama, and fake outrage. One man insists on smelling every spice before buying. Another asks for a love potion disguised as paprika. You oblige. It's just paprika. But he walks away hopeful, and that's worth something. As twilight descends, you count your coins, realize half are in a currency no one accepts, and pretend to feel victorious. The marketplace winds down slowly. Traders share stale bread, sing off-key songs about mold, and swap tales of the time someone bartered a goat for a single clove. Historians still argue whether this was a metaphor or just very confused barter. You lie back against your cart, gaze at the stars blinking above the steppe, and wonder if they too smell faintly of turmeric. Your boots are cracked, your back is sore, and your profits are modest. But for now, you've survived another day in the empire of dust and deals. And your pepper, still slightly cursed. Morning arrives like a slap from a cold fish, abrupt, wet, and utterly disrespectful. You blink yourself, awake beneath a piece of felt that once aspired to be a blanket and now more closely resembles damp disappointment. The market is already stirring. Nearby, someone is shouting about apricots. Someone else is shouting about someone shouting about apricots. You stretch, your spine making sounds usually reserved for falling timber, and begin the spice merchant's daily ritual of self-repair. Shake out your clothes, brush off the crumbs of last night's bread, a word we use loosely, and negotiate with your boots to stay intact for one more day. Breakfast is optimism. Technically, it's millet porridge. But if you close your eyes and chew fast enough, it might be hope. Your assistant brings you fermented mare's milk, which has the texture of melted chalk and the emotional vibe of a dare. You drink it anyway. You're a professional. Today, you're meeting your supplier, a man who looks like a mix between a scarecrow and a tax collector, and somehow smells like both. He arrives in a cloud of camel hair and conspiracy, clutching a pouch of cloves with the reverence of a man holding dragon eggs. He insists on counting every peppercorn with exaggerated ceremony. One for the Khan, one for the wind, one for the spirits, he mutters, until you gently remind him that you do. In fact, have other things to do this decade. You hand over silver. He hands over the spices and a riddle about destiny. Fair trade. As you walk back through the city, you're reminded that being a spice merchant is not just about spices. It's also about dodging tax officials, outwitting counterfeiters, and navigating the surprisingly vicious politics of clove pricing. You pass a monk selling celestial salt that is absolutely just sand, and a boy hawking cinnamon bark that smells suspiciously like tree. You stop at a bathhouse not because you intend to bathe, of course, but because bathhouses are where the best gossip happens. You sit on a heated bench, surrounded by sweaty diplomacy. A Mongol general is loudly accusing a Chinese merchant of spice fraud. A Persian trader offers to settle the dispute with poetry. You sip tea and pretend not to eavesdrop. Back outside, a sandstorm begins assembling on the horizon like an angry stage play. You know the drill. Tie down the goods, wrap your head, and pray to whichever local god governs weather-related inconveniences. The wind hits like it's personally offended. Within minutes, your inventory looks like it's been dusted with antique flour. When the sky clears, your stall resembles a tragic excavation site. You salvage what you can, repolish the cardamom, and pretend your new earth-aged blend is intentional. A customer arrives, sniffs deeply, and nods with solemn approval. Marketing wins again. In the afternoon, you're summoned to a banquet. You weren't invited, you were summoned, which is far worse. A local noble wants to sample the finer spices, which means he wants you to flatter him while he eats your profits. You bring a sampler box and your most submissive smile. The banquet is a display of ambition, gluttony, and fermented mystery. Dishes are passed around with reverence, as though each one might be either divine or fatal. You watch a man eat what appears to be boiled sheepface while discussing cinnamon's aphrodisiac properties. Historians still argue whether that was metaphor or medical advice. You sprinkle sumac on roasted lamb, cardamom on rice, and cumin on eggs. Everyone oohs, no one pays. The noble gives you a ring for your troubles. It is made of brass and optimism. You thank him anyway, because survival often tastes like humble pie, with a side of dry coriander. That night, back at your cart, you count your stock by candlelight. Some of the saffron is gone. So is your assistant. You assume he's either eloped or been kidnapped. Either way, you'll check under the tea crates in the morning. You lie back, body humming with fatigue, and let your thoughts wander. You once dreamed of owning a silk pavilion. Now you dream of not dying from spicy bankruptcy. Still, as the stars glitter above Karakorum, you feel oddly at peace. You've made it through another day. Barely. And the pepper's still cursed. Possibly more cursed than before. The sun is barely a whisper on the steppe horizon when the smell of charred yak butter reaches your nose. It's not the scent of breakfast. It's the scent of someone else's breakfast, wafting uninvited into your nostrils. You are, after all, a spice merchant, not a breakfast participant. Your morning begins not with a meal, but with a pounding headache and a suspicious note pinned to your cart that reads, "I took 2 jars of saffron." We'll pay in favors. It is unsigned. Of course. You push aside the curtain of your makeshift sleeping space and step out into a world that is somehow both muddy and dusty, like nature couldn't decide on a texture. The streets are filled with the glorious cacophony of trade carts creaking under sacks of wheat, oxen grumbling at the futility of their existence, and merchants haggling in at least 6 dialects that all sound vaguely annoyed. Your destination today is the caravanserai, a rest stop for travelers, traders, and whatever else chooses to walk, crawl, or roll along the Silk Road. It's part motel, part zoo, part gossip mill. You're delivering a parcel of saffron to a Persian apothecary with a mustache, so magnificent it likely has its own travel papers. On the way, you're intercepted by a bureaucrat who looks like he hasn't smiled since Genghis Khan's puberty. He demands your trade license. You hand it over. He squints. He says it's outdated. You squint back and say the same about his shoes. Somehow, this ends in you paying a fee and receiving a new license that looks identical to the old one, except it's now slightly more wrinkled and legally heavier. Arriving at the caravanserai, you're greeted by the smell of camel sweat and optimism. Travelers from across continents gather here, shouting prices and making deals while drinking fermented things that were never meant to ferment. You find the apothecary behind a table, covered in glass vials and moral ambiguity. He examines your saffron as though it might explode, sniffs it, declares it almost divine, and hands you a pouch of silver coins so light it could be mistaken for a joke. You thank him anyway. It's not about fairness, it's about repeat customers and not being cursed by a Persian sorcerer. You wander through the stalls afterward, searching for rare spices, or at least someone who'll buy your surplus anise seeds. You find instead a Mongol poet selling wind-dried parsley and reading odes about cinnamon's tragic love life. You leave him a pinch of nutmeg in exchange for a poem. It's terrible. You frame it in your cart anyway. Midday comes, and with it, the dust. Not just a sprinkle, but an airborne wall of regret. You pull your scarf over your face and shuffle through the chaos, dodging sheep, shouting Kazakhs, and the occasional desperate missionary offering you pamphlets in 12 languages. One of them insists nutmeg wards off sin. Another warns it causes it. Historians still argue whether medieval traders ever actually believed in the mystical powers of the spices they sold, or if they just figured a good story doubled the price. By late afternoon, you're exhausted, itchy, and approximately 3 spices short. You stop at a tea house where the tea is more philosophical than flavorful, and listen to old men argue about whether pepper should be considered currency. One man insists he paid for his second wife entirely in cloves. You pretend to be impressed. Everyone pretends in tea houses. You leave with a new idea. Advertise your next shipment of turmeric as a cure for marital fatigue. No one will check. And if they do, you'll simply blame the preparation method, or the humidity, or karma. That evening, back at your cart, your assistant has returned. He has no explanation, but he does have your saffron. You're too tired to question this miracle. He also brought fermented duck eggs and a scroll of Chinese riddles. You don't understand either, but you pretend again. Pretending is your strongest muscle. You fall asleep that night to the rhythm of footsteps, the creak of carts, and the whisper of a city that never truly sleeps. Your pouch is a little heavier. Your conscience slightly lighter. Your back still sore. But you've lived another day as a Mongol spice merchant, and that, statistically speaking, is a minor miracle. You don't get a weekend. That concept hasn't been invented yet. What you get instead is more day, followed by more labor, followed by more reasons to question your life choices. Being a spice merchant means you may not dig trenches or plant millet, but your muscles still ache from hauling sacks of cinnamon heavier than your moral compass. You're up before dawn again, because you need to secure your next shipment. Word is there's a new Mongol escort caravan departing tomorrow, complete with archers, who probably moonlight as wedding singers. And if you miss it, your precious cloves might get picked off by bandits, or, worse, mildew. You trudge through the marketplace with a sense of purpose that's only mildly fueled by desperation. Your destination is the warehouse district, where goods are stored in buildings so drafty they qualify as weather simulators. You spot your contact, a man whose beard could be mistaken for a squirrel colony, and who claims to be named Zoltar. You assume this is not his birth name, but you also don't ask, mostly because he's holding a curved dagger with a handle carved from what may or may not be human bone. You inspect the goods: peppercorns from Malabar, saffron from Kashmir, and one small, suspicious bag of dried scorpions. You ask why. He shrugs and says some Persian doctors prescribed them for nosebleeds. Historians still argue whether this was legitimate medicine or a brilliant prank played on the overly curious. The paperwork is a series of grunts and scribbles. You pay in silver, seal the deal with a dramatic nod, and load the goods onto your cart, which now resembles a spiced version of a siege engine. You attempt to hire help for the journey, but most strong men in the area are already busy lifting oxen or chasing sheep. You settle for a boy who says he's strong in the emotional sense. Close enough. Back at your lodgings, which you share with 6 goats and a lute-playing widow named Asha, you begin the slow, painful process of organizing your cargo. The spices must be packed in layered cloth to keep out moisture, rats, and, if possible, small curses. Asha offers to help in exchange for some nutmeg. You agree. She pockets the nutmeg and promptly begins tuning her lute. Helping is a spectrum. Apparently, as the sun climbs higher, so does your blood pressure. You're stopped twice by tax officials, once because they think your cumin smells like opium, and once because they're just bored. You bribe them both with chili flakes and a vague promise of discount ginger next month. By late afternoon, you finally secured a slot in the caravan. It's a dusty line of carts, camels, and hopes held together by frayed rope and mutual paranoia. The lead merchant is a toothless woman named Batu, who has crossed the Gobi Desert 12 times and once fought off wolves with a dried fig. You instantly respect her. You also instantly hide your figs. Dinner is bread so stale it doubles as a blunt weapon, and soup that seems to contain both disappointment and boiled moss. You eat anyway, because you need energy for tomorrow's departure. Your assistant, the emotionally strong boy, spends the meal naming your camels. One is now called Regret. Fitting as night falls. You do a last check of your supplies. 1 sack of saffron is missing. Again, you resist the urge to scream. Instead, you scribble a note. Whoever stole my saffron, may your spices always clump and your soup forever curdle. It feels cathartic. You lie on your mat and try to fall asleep, but the sound of a nearby traveler snoring like a broken bellows makes it difficult. You think about the weight of your cargo, the uncertainty of the road ahead, and the weird fact that some Mongol households used fermented mare's milk as both a beverage and a deodorant. You briefly wonder which is worse. Eventually, sleep claims you, not because you're comfortable, but because your body has issued a strike. You dream of swimming in saffron, arguing with peppercorns, and riding a cinnamon stick into battle. Your brain is weird, but at least it's employed. Dawn again. Mongol dawns are especially loud between the howling wind, braying camels, and someone arguing with a rooster. You wake up wondering if you accidentally slept in a battlefield. But there's no time to dwell. You've joined the caravan now, and it moves with the urgency of a discount theater crowd trying to get the last seat before the fire eaters arrive. Your spot in the convoy is third from the rear, wedged between a glass trader and a woman selling preserved yak. You nod at them like an experienced traveler. But internally, You're calculating how many coins your saffron is worth versus how much danger you're in from the local environment. The answer is a lot. The route begins through relatively calm terrain, sparse hills, dusty plains, the occasional stunted tree looking like it gave up centuries ago. But you know what's coming. This part of the empire is about to hit you with a full buffet of climate hostility sandstorms, flash floods, and something called steppe madness, which scholars believe may be a result of staring at too much nothing for too long. You adjust your cloak, which is mostly decorative and entirely unhelpful. Wind slices through it like gossip through a royal court. The air is dry enough to mummify your lips, and there is no such thing as chapstick. Your best protection is a damp cloth, which is also your only drinking water. Multitasking is survival. By mid-morning, the sun becomes a personal insult. It doesn't shine, it interrogates. You squint ahead and see camels becoming silhouettes, carts becoming mirages. One rider wraps their face entirely in cloth, leaving only their eyes visible, which makes them look like a bank robber with heat stroke. As heat intensifies, the caravan stops to let the animals rest. You try to nap beneath your cart, but discover a colony of fire ants already claimed the space. You lie elsewhere and are promptly bitten by something you never see. It's fine. You didn't need both ankles anyway. Lunch is dried apricots and salted meat. You chew for so long, your jaw forms a union. The yak seller offers you something she calls fermented hoof jelly, which sounds like either a crime or a delicacy. Depending on your level of dehydration, you decline. She shrugs. Her camel eats it instead. Travel resumes. And so does the ambient chaos. One cart breaks a wheel. Another loses its axle. A third catches fire mysteriously. No one panics. This is just what happens on Wednesdays. You lend your rope to the glass merchant, who thanks you by giving you a single green bead. You accept it like it's a royal gem. Storm clouds roll in by late afternoon. You tie down the spice sacks tighter than your hopes. But it's no use. Rain explodes from the sky like an ambush. Within minutes, the path turns to sludge. Wheels stick. Camels grumble. You slip twice and consider lying there forever, possibly becoming a new landmark for future merchants. Historians still argue whether Mongol roads were deliberately kept rough to slow enemies, or if they were simply the result of no one wanting to be in charge of maintenance. Either way, you're ankle deep in history right now, and it smells like wet leather and regret. At camp that night, fires are hard to light, tents harder to pitch. You and your fellow merchants huddle together in a semicircle of damp complaints. Someone sings a song in a language you don't understand, but which still manages to sound like we're all doomed. Dinner is undercooked barley and burnt lentils. You pretend it's gourmet and chew with theatrical approval. Nearby, a Mongol guard sharpens his sword and laughs at something no one said. You pretend it's not about you. Before bed, you do the ritual inventory check. Your saffron is intact. Your pepper damp. Your assistant asleep on the cinnamon. You wrap everything as best you can, using layers of cloth, prayer, and sheer willpower. Sleep is another negotiation. You finally find rest using a burlap sack as a pillow and a pile of ropes as a mattress. The rain continues, turning the earth into a chorus of squelching sounds. A horse sneezes directly into your ear. You don't even flinch. You've reached that level of exhaustion. And just before your brain shuts off, you realize something strange despite the discomfort, the danger, and the yak-based cuisine. You're part of something vast, carrying fragments of flavor from one end of the known world to the other. Spices that once danced on the tongue of a caliph will soon end up in a nobleman's stew far to the west. You, the damp and cranky spice merchant, are the invisible string between empires. And with that thought, you finally let go. Morning again. Your eyelids creak open, and for a blissful half-second, you believe you've woken in a soft feather bed, wrapped in silk sheets, with a servant bringing you warmed honey tea. Then a goat steps directly on your face, and reality reasserts itself with the subtlety of a catapult. The caravan is already in motion. You scramble upright, find your boots half buried in wet ash, and hastily repack your spice bundles. A bag of clove smells faintly like mildew, but you pretend that's part of its earthy character. You have about 3 hours before you cross into the territory of a local warlord who charges a toll, an ironic concept, considering the road is mostly a collection of rocks pretending to be a path. You pass a ruined shrine where travelers leave offerings coins, scraps of bread, and inexplicably, a doll's head. You offer a pinch of cinnamon and a whispered plea not to die from a stray arrow or bad cheese. Nearby, a merchant tells you this region was once a battlefield. Another says it still is. Historians still argue whether Mongol peace was truly peaceful, or just too terrifying to disobey. By midday, the terrain begins to shift again. Forests dot the horizon thin, brittle trees that look like they've seen better centuries. You reach the edge of a river, crossing where a rope ferry is operated by a man who appears to be chewing nails and glaring at the concept of joy itself. You hand over 2 silver coins, and he grunts in what you assume is approval, or indigestion. The river itself is wide, muddy, and smells of regret. Halfway across, the ferry begins listing dangerously. You cling to a bale of nutmeg while the ferrymaster throws insults at the current. "If we drown," he mutters, "at least you'll taste delicious." You survive. Barely. Now comes the final stretch of the journey. As you re-enter settled lands, signs of empire thrum back to life. Way stations with guards who inspect your cart with suspicious intensity. Inns with actual roofs. And a few brave children running beside your caravan hoping for sweets or stories. You give them both, along with a warning never to become spice merchants unless they enjoy sweaty suffering as a lifestyle. They giggle. You cry a little inside. Your destination is a market city walled, bustling, and smelling like boiling meat and ambition. At the gate, you flash your papers and offer a small pouch of cardamom as a bribe, which earns a wink and a welcome. Traveler from a guard with no teeth and too much eyeliner. The city itself feels unreal after so much wilderness. Paved streets, even if they're uneven, real shops, smiling people. A musician plays a lute out of tune. And for some reason, it's the most beautiful sound you've heard in weeks. You set up your stall, lay out your spices. Clove, nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, saffron, every one of them worth more than their weight in silver. A local noble steward approaches, sniffs your coriander, and says, "It will do. You make your first sale. It's enough to pay off your camel debt, feed your assistant, and perhaps if nothing else goes wrong, buy a new pair of socks." The day is loud, colorful, and wildly profitable. People stop to sniff, to ask, to barter. Some offer you fermented milk in exchange. You smile politely and pretend you're lactose intolerant, just in case. As the sun dips, you finally get a bath. Not a river, not a puddle. A real bath. With warm water. In a wooden tub. You soak until your skin forgets it was ever bruised. The innkeeper even gives you a rag that could pass as a towel in dim lighting. You thank him like he just handed you a crown. At dinner, you sit at a shared table with merchants, poets, and a man who claims he once danced for the Khan. You don't know whether he's lying, but his eyebrows are compelling. The food is hot, spiced, and doesn't come with a side of existential dread. That night, you lie on a real bed, a mattress, no less, and stare at the ceiling. Your muscles still hum with the memory of travel, but your stomach is full. Your bags are heavier with coin, and your soul just a little feels like it belongs here. And then, in the final moments before sleep takes you You realize the real treasure wasn't the spices or the gold, it was survival, with all your teeth, mostly. You smile into the pillow. Now the journey settles, the fires are out, the caravan is long behind you. You are no longer crossing cold rivers or ducking beneath swinging swords or chasing rolling sacks of cinnamon across the steppe. You are somewhere softer now, somewhere still. The clatter of hooves fades. The noise of the market dulls, and the sweat of the road is washed away with slow, quiet breathing. Your hands unclench. The aches in your bones begin to forget their own sharpness, and the spice-scented dreams waiting behind your eyelids are already unfolding. Warm and full of sleep, you made it across empires, through storms, past toll gates and toothless guards. You bartered, you trudged, you endured, and now it's time to rest. Let the world shrink to a whisper. Let your thoughts drift away like incense in the cool desert air. You don't need to worry anymore. The spice is safe. The card is still. The stars above you blink with approval, and your eyes can close. Now, we drift back to a time when love was a terrifying combination of superstition, body parts, and homemade glue. You're not exactly on Tinder, but you are holding a strand of your crush's hair and muttering in half-remembered Latin under the glow of a dripping candle. This is your new romantic reality. Welcome to medieval Europe, where love spells don't just exist. They're DIY projects made from what you can scrape off someone's comb. Hey guys, tonight we explore one of history's more fragrant rabbit holes, love spells from medieval Europe and African folklore. You would never think that wooing someone once required collecting their earwax, and yet, here you are, debating whether a fingernail clipping is better than dried sweat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in 1325, which is already a problem. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, you're living in a time when romance involves more bodily fluids than a battlefield surgeon. This particular morning, your heart is aching for a merchant's daughter with curly hair and the social status of a minor goddess. But instead of texting her, you're instructed by a local cunning woman to pluck one of her hairs without her noticing. Easy. Hair was powerful. It was thought to hold the essence of a person, like a medieval USB stick of the soul. You wrap it around a carved wax figure, ideally made from blessed beeswax, though earwax could substitute in urgent cases. The figure is then hidden under your bed or placed near a sacred spring, depending on which translation of the secret of secrets you trust. Some insisted you whisper your desires to it nightly. Others claimed you had to sleep next to it and offer it wine. The line between spellcasting and doll-based cohabitation got very blurry. A mainstream spell from a 14th century English grimoire involved grinding basil and verbena, mixing it with wine, and anointing the wax doll before murmuring phrases that made even Latin teachers squint. The goal, total, undying obsession. You wanted their eyes to twitch every time you walked past. Not that everyone approved. The church called it devil's work. Unless you were a nobleman doing it, then it was eccentric devotion. Punishments ranged from confession to burning, which is quite a leap. Historians still argue whether most of these love spells were done out of genuine belief or because people were just bored, cold, and lonely, with access to livestock and too many candles. And the bodily fluid thing, it gets worse. One French love spell asked the hopeful to mix nail clippings, a hair from the left armpit, and a drop of blood from the tongue. Stir, bury under the threshold of the target's house, and wait. For love, no? for infection. But hey, the spell didn't specify which result was guaranteed. Even the skeptics had a go. A 13th century monk reportedly tried a hair-binding spell for academic curiosity and ended up with a local baker falling in love with him. Was it coincidence, divine prank, or the universe desperately needing content in any case? You sit now with your tiny doll, muttering sweet nothings to a lump of wax holding someone else's dandruff. It's oddly romantic, in a damp sock under your pillow kind of way. You stare at its lifeless eyes and wonder if true love is really worth sneaking around in someone's laundry pile. Then again, if it works, you won't be lonely. You'll just be married to someone who fell for you because of a whisper in a candle, which, to be honest, still sounds more sincere than most dating apps. So you've crafted a wax lover, whispered fevered lines into its tiny ear, and maybe, just maybe, planted it beneath your beloved's doorstep like a passive-aggressive potato. But what if wax and hair weren't your style? What if you preferred something more? Liquid, welcome to the world of medieval love potions, where anything you can stir into a cup is fair game, and the word ethical is mostly decorative. You're now an aspiring alchemist of emotion, standing barefoot in a thatched kitchen that smells like wet herbs and regret. Your mentor, an old apothecary who claims her first love potion accidentally attracted 3 suitors and a goose. She hands you a list that begins with rose petals and quickly derails into goat bile and morning dew collected from a virgin's footstep. Yes, people really believed that. You set to work, boiling things in chipped cauldrons while muttering lines from a romance manual that reads more like a chemistry prank book. Mainstream recipes often included honey, mint, and rose oil, but the fringe favorites, those read like dares. One German folk recipe suggests steeping a man's dried tear in hot ale, then feeding it to the target while looking directly at her left earlobe. That was supposed to induce romantic longing or vomiting. Results may vary. And then there's the old standby menstrual blood. You were told to sneak a drop into your beloved's wine to bind his heart forever. How romantic. Historians still argue whether this was truly practiced or just misogynistic rumor-mongering by nervous monks who didn't understand women or food safety. Even animals weren't spared. Some North African traditions included a lizard's tail or powdered bat bones, though modern scholars suggest these were more symbolic than literal. Still, it's hard to argue symbolism when you're standing over a mortar full of reptile dust, wondering whether love should crunch when swallowed. Your first potion is ready, a deep red concoction with the consistency of old gravy and the scent of cinnamon, desperately trying to hide something worse. You're told to serve it discreetly, ideally mixed into pottage or ale. But here's the kicker. Even in the 13th century, people were skeptical. Love filters often came with disclaimers. Some warned they only lasted until the next new moon. Others said too strong a dose could cause madness, or worse, eternal infatuation. Which, frankly, sounds more like a curse than a blessing. Still, the desire for control was real. In a world where your marriage was likely arranged and your crush was probably betrothed to someone with land. Love potions gave the illusion of agency. They let you believe, if only for a moment, that you could change your fate with herbs and whispering. That maybe love wasn't just politics and dowries, but magic you could bottle. You slip the mixture into a cup, hand it to your oblivious target, and hold your breath. Will they swoon? Will they choke? Will they notice the distinct aftertaste of lizard seconds pass? Nothing happens. Then they sneeze, which could mean you're about to be married by midsummer, or that you just poisoned someone with goat bile. Either way, it's a story. Love, as it turns out, is not always stirred into soup or carved into wax. Sometimes it's sewn into clothing, or more specifically, undergarments. You're now stitching by candlelight, squinting at thread that's been soaked in intentions, a few drops of blessed oil. And if you're following certain Flemish practices, the sweat of your own armpit collected during a full moon. Because clearly, romance should smell like desperation. Welcome to the discreet world of textile sorcery, where charms are hidden in hems, spells embroidered into seams, and underpants are considered high-risk magical real estate. In 14th century Germany, you're instructed to embroider the name of your intended lover onto the inner lining of a tunic. But not just their name, oh no. You must also include the symbol of Venus, 3 concentric hearts, and a Latin phrase that translates roughly to, "You cannot run from me," even with shoes. Historians still argue whether this was meant to enchant or just terrify the recipient. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, traditional love charms involve beaded waist belts infused with incantations, sometimes tucked with powdered herbs or ground incense. These belts weren't worn for fashion. They were designed to be spiritually magnetic. And itchy. Very, very itchy. Your current project is a pair of socks. Why socks? Because your local wise woman insists that if your beloved puts them on while thinking of you, they'll never forget you. Unfortunately, socks are rare in your village and feet are disgusting. But you persevere. You even sneak in a tiny sachet of rose thorns and clove wrapped in silk, sewn into the cuff like a floral landmine. The real challenge isn't making the garment. It's the delivery. You have to place the item somewhere. It'll be worn naturally, no suspicious gifting. You leave it accidentally on the communal laundry line, hoping they'll grab it in haste. You watch from the bushes. They approach, they pause, they pick it up, and then they hand it to their sister. Now you've enchanted the wrong person, who is now smiling at you in a way that feels alarmingly permanent. Back to the drawing board. There are more extreme versions, of course. A French spell book once suggested tying a lock of your lover's hair into the waistband of your undergarments so their passions will mirror your own. Fringe, certainly. But it worked its way into certain noble households. The infamous Isabeau of Bavaria was rumored to wear silk robes embroidered with prayers to bind her husband's affections, though historians still argue whether this was practical magic or just a particularly clingy fashion choice. These textile spells weren't limited by gender, either. Men sewed charms into hats, cuffs, and gloves in West African traditions. Amulets, known as gris-gris, were tied around waists or wrists, stitched into garments by spiritual practitioners who understood that cotton and destiny go hand in hand. You finish a new piece, a linen handkerchief this time, embroidered with initials and a drop of your own blood. Risky, absolutely, but romantic in the medieval sense. Yes, which is to say reckless, slightly unsanitary, and probably forbidden by the church. You fold it neatly, leave it where it can be found, and walk away. Later that day, you see them using it to clean their teeth. Ah, love, you are not, by any stretch, a pharmacist. But here you are anyway, hunched over a wooden mortar, mashing together rose petals. Dried batwing, actually, a burnt fig. But your supplier insists on the drama, a dash of nutmeg, and something labeled only as essence of longing, which smells suspiciously like vinegar, because now, the love spell takes the form of a potion, and you're about to drink it, or worse, serve it. Welcome to the medieval apothecary of romance, where every liquid is part science, part sorcery, and mostly stomachache. In both Europe and large swaths of West Africa, love potions were an entire ecosystem, carefully brewed, painfully administered, and questionably effective. You tilt the wooden bowl toward your lips. It fizzes, not like a soda, but more like boiling regret. The recipe, copied from a 13th century French grimoire, instructs you to add 7 drops of red wine, 2 pinches of powdered magnetite, and 1 shaving from the heel of a boot that has walked across dew before sunrise. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or just a prank played on overly lovesick scribes. The theory behind these potions is noble. A shared drink connects hearts. The reality is, people kept collapsing. Many formulas included mandrake root, which, while famous for its vaguely human shape and screams in legend, is also a narcotic. And when boiled too long, a laxative, some love, some loss of control. In parts of 14th century Mali, you could visit a marabout, a spiritual leader, who might give you a liquid amulet, an herbal concentrate inscribed with verses from the Quran or ancestral poetry. Drink it at sunrise, barefoot, facing east. Also, no speaking for an hour, which frankly improves your odds in most romantic pursuits. Back in medieval Spain, potion crafters recommended a concoction of honey, saffron, and the ashes of a burned love letter. You write one, burn it ceremoniously, scrape it into your brew, and immediately regret your decision when you realize the ink includes crushed beetle shells. Now your potion sparkles, unintentionally festive. The real trick, of course, is stealth. Your target must drink the potion without knowing it's a potion. You try slipping it into a communal soup. They take a spoonful, wrinkle their nose, and mutter, "Who added spoiled cherries?" Oops. You offer to take the rest, claiming it's an old family remedy for throat sadness. You chug it. Your tongue turns blue. You smile bravely. There are accounts, one especially bizarre, from a monastery in what is now Poland, where a monk attempted to craft a love potion using goat milk in scripture. The effect, according to the records, the goat fell asleep. The monk confessed everything, and the object of his affection joined a nunnery. Magic is unpredictable. African love potions were often blessed with rhythmic chanting, drum beats, or the symbolic passing through smoke. The sensory overload helped seal the intent and likely distracted from the fact that most of these brews tasted like regret. The potion you drank finally kicks in. Your heart races. You feel bold. You stand. You march toward your beloved with newfound purpose. Then promptly trip, burp violet vapor, and faint. You wake up in a haystack. Love is complicated. When in doubt, pluck some hair. That's the general vibe of medieval love logic. If your affection isn't returned, obviously it's because you haven't braided their nail clippings into a charm and whispered to it under the moon. Welcome to the chaotic world of personal tokens. Tiny pieces of someone that supposedly carry massive magical weight. Creepy, certainly, but also oddly intimate. You crouch near the town fountain. Target acquired, your crush just dropped their glove. You seize it like it's a sacred relic. The plan, sleep with it under your pillow for 7 nights. Because as medieval European folklore claims, dreams born from touch carry true desire. Historians still argue whether this was metaphorical or just a medieval excuse for sniffing things. Hair was a go-to. Braids of hair bound into wax dolls, buried under floorboards or hidden in shoes. Sometimes, lovers exchanged locks willingly. Other times, well, you had to get creative. A quick snip during a distracted moment, a comb borrowed and never returned. Congratulations, you're in love. Also, possibly guilty of theft. In parts of West Africa, spiritualists might craft gree-gree amulets containing personal belongings, like threads from a sleeve, nail trimmings, or even spit yes, really. These were wrapped in leather or cloth and worn close to the skin. The idea was simple. If you carry someone's essence, you can sway their spirit. Consent rarely discussed, results unclear, but it does make you think twice about leaving socks behind. One particularly strange case from 15th century France involves a merchant who believed that soaking his beloved's handkerchief in rosewater and then burning it while chanting her name backwards would bind her heart to his. What actually happened is the fire spread to his beard, and she married someone with fewer delusions and more eyebrows. You, of course, are now assembling your own charm. A sliver of wood from the bench where they sat. A torn thread from the hem of their tunic, even their reflection captured, supposedly, in a small vial of moon-touched water. Is that how reflections work? Science says no. Medieval logic says close enough. You whisper their name to your token 3 times under your breath. Then bury it beside a tree with roots shaped like entwined lovers. A squirrel watches, clearly judging your life choices. Back in West African traditions, some charms were made not to attract love, but to protect it, used to keep rivals away or soothe tensions. Some even carried crushed coral, bird feathers, or secret messages written in symbols only the wearer in the spirit world could understand. Emotional security system activated. You sleep with your charm tucked under your thin straw pillow. You dream of them, and also of frogs. Probably not related, but it does make you suspicious of the wax figurine melting by your bedside. In the morning, nothing has changed. They still walk past you without a glance. But your charm smells faintly of lavender and desperation. Maybe, just maybe, it's working. Or maybe, just maybe, you need better hobbies. Now, we boil herbs and chant nonsense. Because what's more romantic than sticking your head in a pot of steaming basil while whispering someone's name into a dead pigeon's feather? Welcome to the mystical, yet sneeze-inducing world of herbal infusions and recitations. The medieval equivalent of late-night texting, followed by a nervous breakdown. You begin by wandering through a field that's definitely 80% weeds, 10% stinging nettles, and 10% things you hope aren't cursed. Somewhere in this chlorophyll jungle is the sacred plant that allegedly makes hearts flutter verbena, also known as vervain. It's been labeled everything from love potion-based to vampire repellent. Historians still argue whether its popularity came from pagan rites, early Christian folklore, or just that it was easy to grow near outhouses. You crush a few leaves. You boil them. You add honey. Now drink, but slowly, while reciting the name of the one you pine for. Bonus points if you do this while facing east at dawn. Triple points if you don't sneeze mid-ritual. In 14th century Tuscany, a popular brew involved steeping marjoram, rosemary, and thyme, 3 herbs that smell great and taste like soup, but were said to warm the blood toward affection. And while historians acknowledge rosemary's use in weddings and funerals, the part about it making someone fall in love is debatable. Still, you sip the potion like it's medieval kombucha and hope for the best. In West African traditions, herbal blends were often brewed for spiritual protection and romantic intent. Infusions made with kola nut, ginger, and tree bark were rubbed on wrists or sipped before romantic encounters. Some diviners even buried roots in crossroads to disrupt a rival's charm. Again, spells and shade, all in one tidy package. You sit by your tiny fire. The wind picks up. Your potion is bubbling with suspicious enthusiasm. You begin the chant something like, "Come to me, O tender heart of pine." You're not sure if you're summoning a lover or a sentient tree, but it sounds poetic enough. A cat walks by. You freeze. If the cat nods, that's good luck. If it hisses, that's, well, medieval omens are vague. But you assume you've offended some herb. You smear a drop of your love tea behind your ears like perfume. It smells like salad dressing. You feel powerful, or possibly allergic, either way. You strut into the town square, fully expecting sparks to fly. Nobody notices, except the cat. He's still watching. Later that night, you try another method, soaking a bay leaf in wine, writing the initials of your beloved on it, and placing it under your tongue while repeating, "Return to me." Heart entwined, the effect is immediate. Your tongue is now numb, and you're not sure if it's magic or a poor reaction to whatever was on that leaf. Meanwhile, African oral traditions describe a ritual where certain leaves were crushed and sprinkled in doorways to attract love or block rivals. Or you wonder if it works on nosy neighbors or chickens. Probably both. Your dreams that night are filled with floating herbs, soft voices, and one very smug pigeon holding a flower. Love, you realize, might not be in the air, but basil certainly is. Now, we whisper into bread. Yes, tonight's enchantment brings us to perhaps the most edible category of love spells enchanted food. Because what's more persuasive than a cookie with romantic intentions or a pie infused with desperation in medieval Europe and parts of Africa? If you couldn't seduce someone with your smile, your next best bet was your kitchen and your willingness to stir feelings into stew. Literally. Let's start with the bread. In 13th century England, love-struck bakers whispered their beloved's name into rising dough. Once baked, the bread was offered casually here. Have a slice of my possibly haunted rye. The idea was that your longing would rise with the yeast and infuse the crumb with passion. Historians still argue whether this practice had actual results or simply became a medieval excuse for carbs and flirting. But if you were really committed, you'd go further. You'd bake a small charm into the loaf. A hair, a thread from your beloved's clothing, or even brace yourself a nail. Yes, a literal iron nail. The logic if it hurt your gums. You'd remember who gave it to you. Nothing says romance like mild dental trauma. In African folklore, food-based love magic often involves special stews or porridges prepared under strict spiritual guidelines. Certain spices, like alligator pepper and grains of paradise, were prized for their binding effects. You might cook them at dawn, whisper prayers into the pot, and serve it with a smile and perhaps a side eye if you suspect they've been flirting elsewhere. Back in medieval France, desperate lovers used apples. You'd carve the initials of your desire into the fruit, then bury it near their home or feed it to them during a feast. In theory, their affections would ripen like the apple. In practice, you were just being very creepy with produce. But hey, it's the Middle Ages. Social boundaries are still a work in progress. One German text suggests slipping a drop of menstrual blood into a drink to bind a lover forever. We won't linger on this one too long, except to say that scholars continue to debate whether this was symbolic, literal, or simply misunderstood by later readers. Either way, maybe don't try this at home, or ever, in Yoruba tradition. Love charms included edible offerings to Orisha spirits, sometimes incorporating honey, palm oil, or mashed yams shaped like hearts. These were left on shrines or at crossroads because nothing makes you reflect on your choices like passing a yam with a face in it. Back in your thatched roof kitchen, you stir a pot of barley soup with the intensity of a Shakespearean monologue. You hum. You toss in herbs from yesterday's potion. You taste. It's okay. A bit earthy. Definitely enchanting, if your definition of enchanting includes mild indigestion. You bake small buns in heart shapes using heart-shaped stones. Naturally, because molds haven't been invented. You hide them in your basket. You wait. Later, you offer one to your beloved, who eats it in 2 bites and doesn't even say thank you. You wonder if love spells are less effective on people who chew with their mouths open. That night, as you lie on your straw mattress, stomach full of spell-infused pastries, you consider your next move. A lock of hair, a secret poem, a pigeon dressed as Cupid No. Tomorrow, you're just going to smile, and maybe bring better seasoning. Now, we bury hearts in crossroads, not metaphorical hearts, actual representations, sometimes even real ones. Because when food fails and whispers go unheard, the love magician turns to the earth, dirt, clay, bones, grave dust. This is where the truly persistent find their craft, and where things get much weirder. You rise at twilight. Your goal, to bind the soul of someone who barely knows your name. All you need is a chicken's foot, a lock of their hair, and access to a public crossroads. Simple shopping list. Really. In European village magic, crossroads were believed to be thin places, locations where the veil between worlds frayed just enough for magic to slip through. You don't ask for love at a crossroads, you demand it, preferably with chanting and a mildly terrifying mask. One Flemish spell instructed lovers to bury a handmade wax heart, pierced with 3 pins, one for body, one for soul, one for stubbornness. The heart had to be buried before sunrise and retrieved 7 nights later. If it melted, your lover would fall hopelessly for you. If it didn't, you just created a wax pest in the soil. Congrats. Meanwhile, in some regions of West Africa, crossroads were places to commune with spirits known as ajogun, who could either help your love blossom or curse you with eternal loneliness, depending on how politely you asked. Honey, cowrie shells, and cola nuts were typical offerings. Sometimes you'd leave a question written on palm frond parchment. Should I pursue them? You'd return the next day to see if the note was moved. If yes, proceed. If no, maybe rethink everything, including your handwriting. There were even mirror spells. In Eastern Europe, a young woman might bury a mirror with her beloved's name etched into the back, believing it would reflect her image into his dreams. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic love magic or just an early form of guilt tripping from beyond the shrubbery. Sometimes, animals were involved. A love-struck teenager in 15th century rural France might crush the bones of a toad, mix it with powdered rose petals, and bury the mixture under a tree their target walked past daily. The theory, their footsteps activated the spell. The reality, they probably just sneezed a lot. But perhaps the oddest of all came from northern Italy. If you were unlucky in love, you dig a hole, scream your lover's name into it, and then fill it with dried herbs, rose thorns, and if you were really upset, burnt shoelaces. Scholars debate whether this was meant to attract or banish. Either way, the neighbors definitely noticed. And then, of course, came the warnings. You couldn't just dig love into being without consequences. Get a name wrong. You might enchant the local baker instead. Forget to cover the hole properly. You'd anger the ground spirits and wake up with nettles in your boots. Magic, like relationships, was risky business. You sigh, your hands are dirty. Your nails are caked with mud and something that might be goose feather. You've whispered your desires into soil and waited in silence. Now all you can do is hope your spell stirs more than worms. Tomorrow, if nothing happens, maybe you'll try a love song or just eye contact. Now, we boil love in broth and slip it in quietly, because when all the knots are tied, the hearts are buried. And the wax dolls lie forgotten in drawers. What's left? The kitchen. It always comes back to the kitchen. Welcome to the ancient art of love potions, where your affection is one ladle away from full-blown obsession, and consent is something left stirring on the stove. You hover over a steaming pot, pretending to make stew. Your beloved sitting 2 tables away, entirely unaware that tonight's special has extra longing. In both medieval Europe and across West African traditions, love through ingestion was an art and a dangerous one. The ingredients ranged from charming to utterly concerning. A Spanish folk remedy suggested mixing cinnamon, honey, and a drop of your blood into warm wine, then offering it as a celebration drink. Historians still argue whether these potions were ever actually consumed or just fantasized into lore. But one thing's certain: people have been slipping questionable things into soup for a very long time. Over in Ethiopia, oral traditions speak of tej, a honey wine occasionally infused with love intentions, especially during festivals, though not explicitly magical. The act of sharing a cup, pouring it slowly, or adding herbs like rue or garlic carried coded meanings. Drink it with someone you're flirting, refuse it, you're practically at war. In France, Young women were warned to avoid herbal teas from rivals, mugwort for memory, mint for madness, said one charm. Combine the wrong pair, and your heart wouldn't flutter, it would race. And not romantically. Meanwhile, in the Congo Basin, some lovers brewed speaking leaves, plants said to whisper truths into dreams. A crushed stem in food could make the target dream of your face for 7 nights. Unless they dreamt of frogs. That meant the plant was expired. But not every potion was about stirring feelings. Some were meant to stir. Obedience. A 14th century German spellbook details a bridal drink made from vinegar, dried liver, and a splash of breast milk. Yes, that was the love cocktail. Supposedly, if a man drank it, he'd never stray again. Realistically, he might just avoid dinner forever. There's a strange comfort in the persistence of it. All this belief that a feeling as unmanageable as love could be brewed, bottled, and delivered like a medieval DoorDash. Some recipes demanded the maker stir only with their left hand. Others insisted you chant while chopping onions, ensuring your tears sealed the spell. Nothing says romance like crying over dinner prep. Of course, the most legendary love potion of all remains elusive. Historians still argue whether any of them worked or were just acts of theatrical desperation. A few scholars suggest many potions were placebo tools of confidence. Drink this, believe this. Now go flirt, which, if you think about it, is a spell in itself. You pour your final blend into a carved wooden cup. You imagine your love taking a sip, pausing, blinking, and realizing you were the one all along. More likely, they'll ask, did you put parsley in this? But still you tried. And with that, your spellbook closes. Your herbs are gone. Your cauldron is cooling. Love, like soup, sometimes just needs time, and possibly fewer dead frogs. Now, we open our eyes in ancient Rome, where the birds are chirping. The air smells vaguely of livestock, and love as well. More of a business deal than a sweeping romance. You're strolling through the bustling streets, wearing sandals that definitely weren't designed for comfort, toward your beloved's home. You clutch a small scroll filled with heartfelt poetry, inspired by genuine feelings, but worryingly devoid of cows or chickens. You would never think that your chances at love would hinge less on your charm and more on your poultry offerings. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and don't forget to drop your location and local time down in the comments. I'm always amazed how global this sleepy audience is. As you approach your beloved's door, you glance anxiously at your scroll. You had worked diligently, carefully choosing your words to capture the elegance and passion you felt. Unfortunately, historians still argue whether poetry, even the most lyrical verses, carried any romantic value whatsoever to the average Roman. Most folks preferred a more practical display, usually something edible or sellable. A basket of chickens. Now, that was romantic. A fine, sturdy cow, positively swoon-worthy. But poetry, you might as well offer a handful of sand. Historically, Romans believed marriage was a business arrangement rather than an emotional partnership, often involving an alarming quantity of livestock, land, and slaves. So your sweet verses are actually less impressive than the neighbor's prize-winning goat. Romans genuinely saw no irony in equating livestock with eternal love. In fact, the more livestock you offered, the more sincere your feelings seemed, because everyone knows true love smells like manure. You nervously deliver your poetic masterpiece, hoping your eloquent metaphors outweigh the alarming lack of cows. The family receives you politely, but appears visibly disappointed, muttering that poets rarely have good financial prospects. You recall the unfortunate historical tale of a young Roman named Lucius, who confidently recited love verses in public, only to be chased out of town by a mob laughing hysterically at his flowery expressions. Lucius later found success, not in romance, but as a manure salesman, proving once again where true Roman passions lay. Desperate. You wonder about the love potions whispered about in Roman marketplaces. Perhaps that murky concoction made from pigeon feathers and gladiator sweat would have been a wiser choice than your poetry scroll. Historians still debate the effectiveness of such potions, though presumably, smelling like a gladiator at least made someone stand out. Eventually, you leave empty-handed and cowless, your poetry scroll now more useful as kindling than romantic currency. You trudge back home, reconsidering your career as an aspiring poet. Perhaps you muse bitterly. The real key to lasting romance in ancient Rome wasn't heartfelt verses, but simply having a better collection of livestock. Next time, maybe skip the sonnets and invest in chickens. You blink, and now you're transported to the medieval countryside, where love isn't just blind, it's likely suffering from poor hygiene as well. You've somehow ended up sitting in a muddy village square, scrolling through medieval matches, each profile painfully practical. Strong lad, decent teeth, owns 3 pigs. Or fair maiden, excellent churner of butter, comes with small dowry and modest flea infestation. It's becoming clear that medieval romance isn't about butterflies in your stomach. It's about how many sheep you can offer and how far away your nearest pigsty is from your home. The harsh truth is that marriage was considered primarily an economic merger, less about soulmates and more about livestock mates. Imagine your ideal medieval partner, a lovely face, perhaps decent cooking skills, and a minimal number of visible sores. Now imagine realizing the main criteria your parents care about is how many sacks of grain your beloved can bring to the table. Historians still debate whether medieval love letters were genuine expressions of affection or just very poetic financial statements wrapped in pretty parchment. And speaking of poetry, let's talk about serenades, those romantic scenes of a handsome knight standing beneath a lady's window, strumming his lute, singing songs of eternal devotion. Ah, yes, the medieval version of sliding into the DMs. Unfortunately, real medieval serenades often ended less romantically and more messily, as evidenced by historical accounts of buckets of questionable substances dumped on overly enthusiastic serenaders. There's nothing like a rainstorm of waste to dampen the flames of love, or at least extinguish your torch. And as for noble courtship, let's discuss the surprisingly common practice of proposing via sheep count. In a documented case, a nobleman famously wooed his beloved by detailing, in excruciating numerical terms, precisely how many sheep he owned. Nothing says romance quite like a comprehensive livestock inventory. Apparently, mathematics was medieval foreplay, and failing to accurately count your sheep could doom your romantic ambitions. Now imagine swiping left and right through these medieval matches. Owns 5 cows, but terrible breath. Swipe left. Handsome, but once accused of witchcraft twice. Swipe left again. Has land but no teeth, moderate interest. The paradoxical nature of medieval courtship was clear. While love might have been blind, it certainly wasn't immune to odors or property assessments. The modern conveniences of dating apps suddenly seem heavenly. Sure, they might be emotionally draining or dignity-crushing, but at least no one's expecting you to evaluate your partner's worth based on the proximity of their barn or their ability to accurately count sheep. You reflect gratefully that your biggest worry on Tinder is an awkward dinner, not negotiating dowry terms or enduring public humiliation via waste-filled buckets. As you rise from your medieval seat, brushing straw and questionable dirt from your clothes, you're glad you didn't actually swipe right. After all, medieval romance was less about finding your soulmate and more about finding someone who wouldn't lose the farm or accidentally burn down your hovel. As you move forward, you feel infinitely relieved that modern dating troubles, for all their awkwardness, rarely involve livestock appraisals or buckets of medieval sewage. just as you're getting comfortable, you suddenly find yourself standing in the shadowy halls of an ancient Egyptian palace, holding a tray filled with cosmetics made from ingredients so questionable they'd be banned in most modern pharmacies. You're about to help Pharaoh prepare for a blind date, a diplomatic affair, mind you, which has all the romance of a job interview combined with the stress of international politics. You'd never guess that world peace could hinge on whether someone finds Pharaoh's eyeliner charming enough. Ah yes, eyeliner. You carefully apply a luxurious mixture made primarily from soot, lead, and crocodile dung because nothing screams allure quite like reptilian feces smeared around your eyes. Egyptians believed these cosmetics held mystical protective powers, though historians still debate whether it actually warded off evil spirits or just potential suitors with functioning noses. You try not to breathe deeply. Quietly grateful modern beauty standards rarely involve animal waste. As you delicately finish Pharaoh's makeup, he admires himself approvingly in a polished bronze mirror. He gives you a confident nod and instructs you to arrange his romantic gift, a life-sized statue of himself, because humility, apparently, hadn't been invented yet. You marvel at how seamlessly Pharaoh assumes a giant stone representation of himself. Smiling stiffly is precisely what his potential lover desires. After all, what better way to say, "I love you," than a massive chunk of granite depicting your ego Egyptian courtship, you quickly realize, rarely involved anything resembling personal compatibility. Instead, relationships were often strategic arrangements designed to stabilize kingdoms, merge fortunes, or simply prevent wars. A blind date, then, was less about sparks flying and more about dodging diplomatic disasters. Romantic dinners weren't candlelit. They were tense negotiations featuring roasted geese and painfully awkward silence. You remember the historical pharaoh who confidently sent his statue abroad as a romantic overture, fully expecting adoration, only to have the foreign queen remark dryly that the granite version had far better manners. Pharaohs, it seems, routinely mistook arrogance for charm, a romantic misstep echoed throughout history, with Pharaoh's blind date rapidly approaching. You feel a pang of sympathy for the unfortunate diplomat about to face this walking ego wrapped in linen. After all, Pharaoh likely won't even remember their name, much less their favorite color or interests. Instead, he'll enthusiastically discuss military victories, monument building, and the uncanny resemblance between himself and his statue. As you step back, you wonder how the evening will unfold. Will Pharaoh's date politely nod through endless stories of pyramid building and Nile flooding, secretly longing for their own kingdom, or just quietly plotting their diplomatic exit strategy? Either way, romance seems unlikely. At best, they'll politely tolerate each other. At worst, war might break out before dessert arrives. Walking away from the royal chambers, you feel relieved your romantic misadventures rarely involve international politics or statues of yourself. No crocodile dung, eyeliner, no diplomatic crises sparked by a disappointing blind date. Pharaoh's romantic evening is poised to be memorable, not for sparks of passion, but for the awkwardness only ancient diplomacy could produce. Your grateful modern love rarely hinges on global peace treaties or granite replicas of your face. You blink again, and suddenly, you're standing on the deck of a Viking longship, floating through frigid waters on what was supposed to be a romantic cruise, but now seems destined to become maritime mayhem. You've dressed warmly in furs, wielding not roses, but an axe, because love, in the Viking world, apparently required protective gear around you. Couples exchange vows alongside sharp insults, since Vikings believed that true love blossomed best under conditions resembling psychological warfare. And speaking of psychological warfare, meet the flighting, a beloved Viking courtship tradition. It involved hurling creative insults at your beloved, something like poetic roasting. Except far less charming, and infinitely more aggressive. Imagine confessing your deepest romantic feelings by poetically accusing your intended of having the odor of wet sheep and the intelligence of a drunken goose. Strangely, Vikings considered this wildly romantic, although historians still argue whether flighting led to marriage, violence, or just seriously damaged self-esteem. Tonight's romantic cruise celebrates the union of Thorkel and Astrid, whose love story apparently blossomed after Thorkel declared Astrid's hair resembled seaweed and her singing could frighten off trolls. Astrid responded affectionately by asserting, Thorkel had the charisma of a beached whale and the bravery of a terrified rabbit. Ah, true love indeed. However, not every Viking wedding went smoothly. Take the documented misadventure of poor Bjorn, who accidentally raided his bride's village mid-ceremony due to navigational confusion. Imagine your romantic day ruined because the groom mistakenly burned down your parents' barn and abducted half your relatives. But perhaps Bjorn's love was true after all. Nothing says devotion quite like a small invasion in your honor. Historians continue debating whether Viking weddings were more fight or feast. And truthfully, the line seemed thin. Weddings often descended into drunken brawls, disputes over land, or literal sword duels between family members who couldn't remember which insult was ceremonial and which was genuinely offensive. Wedding gifts might include livestock, weapons, or ointments to heal injuries sustained during the festivities. Because what's a romantic evening without a few battle scars back aboard your cruise? The festivities escalate as the groom's best friend mistakenly compliments the bride too politely, causing immediate suspicion and a brief scuffle. Romance, Viking style, often hinged on delicate misunderstandings, like complimenting someone without sufficient insult, an embarrassing oversight indeed. As waves gently rock the longship, you begin to appreciate modern dating's subtler indignities. Sure, ghosting hurts, but at least you don't risk accidental invasions or sword wounds during a first date. You sigh with relief, knowing that the biggest risk in modern courtship might be paying for overpriced avocado toast, not dodging axes and poetic insults. Finally, as the Viking wedding celebration fades beneath a chilly northern sky, you silently acknowledge that true love, Viking style, required bravery, sharp wit, and possibly medical assistance. You quietly decide your romantic ambitions don't require helmets or battle axes, just decent conversation and fewer threats of invasion. You're suddenly thrust into Elizabethan England, and as you stumble through darkened alleyways toward your romantic rendezvous, you're acutely aware that bad breath is probably the least unpleasant aroma you'll encounter tonight. Courtship here is a Shakespearean drama, complete with overly dramatic poetry and alarming declarations of lovesickness. Young men write sonnets claiming they're dying from heartache, though, honestly, historians still argue whether it was heartache or just indigestion from spoiled meat. Take the romantic gifts exchanged: locks of hair, snippets of fingernails, and pieces of clothing. It's unclear if these tokens were endearing or simply the creepiest collectibles ever offered in the name of love. Imagine professing eternal devotion by presenting your beloved with a carefully preserved toenail. Nothing whispers romance like personal hygiene scraps. Speaking of dramatic gestures, history recalls a lovesick suitor named Edmund who climbed his beloved's balcony, determined to serenade her, only to fall spectacularly and literally break his leg. Turns out, Elizabethan balconies weren't built for midnight acrobatics, or perhaps Edmund simply lacked balance. Either way, he spent weeks healing, likely reconsidering whether true love was worth the medical bills. Courtship rituals involved elaborate dances, excessively polite conversation, and endless flowery compliments. Unfortunately, these romantic dances often devolved into absurd competitions. One wrong step could ruin your reputation or send you tumbling into the punch bowl. In fact, many marriages happen not because of chemistry, but simply because two people managed to avoid stepping on each other's feet. Elizabethans were obsessed with appearance-powdered faces, tightly corseted waists, and flamboyant hats that doubled as nesting spots for birds. Imagine courting someone whose hairstyle requires architectural support. It wasn't uncommon for wigs to hide lice or even small vermin, making any romantic gesture a risky proposition involving potential wildlife encounters. You realize quickly that Shakespearean romance was less dreamy poetry and more practical survival. Marriage proposals were often negotiations involving land, livestock, and sometimes outright bribery. As you shuffle through the smoky streets, stepping carefully around mysterious puddles, you appreciate modern romance's simpler complications. Awkward text exchanges and ghosting suddenly seem preferable to hazardous hairstyles. Broken limbs, or declarations of love accompanied by toenails. Grateful you're not navigating romance in tights or a corset, you quietly leave Elizabethan England behind. Relieved your modern heartaches involve less poetry, fewer vermin, and absolutely no toenail exchanges. Without warning, you're whisked away to feudal Japan, seated nervously at a samurai speed dating event, because clearly, nothing screams romance quite like rigorous 5-minute tea ceremonies and rapid-fire conversations about family honor. You awkwardly shuffle from table to table, hoping your inability to properly fold a kimono won't doom your romantic chances or result in dishonorably spilled tea. Samurai romance was intense failure in love, could sometimes result in literal sword duels, as wounded pride required immediate and very public restoration. Historians still argue whether samurai marriages were founded upon deep affection or simply merged fortunes to prevent dishonorable poverty. But tonight, your main concern isn't honor. It's surviving these lightning-fast tea exchanges without scalding yourself or offending someone's ancestors. Your next date is a nervous young samurai clutching a small scroll. He proudly explains he once attempted to propose by sending a messenger pigeon bearing a romantic poem, an exquisite plan. Had the pigeon not disastrously flown into enemy territory? Unfortunately, the pigeon was intercepted, and his poetic proposal mistakenly became a war declaration. Young love turning romantic intent into international incidents. As the event continues, you're increasingly impressed by how much romantic pressure can be packed into 5-minute tea rituals. Between sipping carefully prepared matcha and discussing family lineage, your mind wanders to modern dating. Sure, swiping right can bruise your ego, but at least it rarely results in accidentally starting clan warfare. Another samurai at your table proudly boasts he's mastered a love ballad composed entirely in haiku form. You nod politely, knowing full well the haiku involves cherry blossoms, moonlight, and an alarming amount of bloodshed imagery. After all, nothing ignites passion quite like vivid descriptions of seasonal beauty and potential death by sword. You quickly realize samurai romance isn't about candlelit dinners and moonlit walks, but rigid formality and complex etiquette. A single slip of manners or accidental spilling of tea could dishonor your entire lineage, no pressure. Suddenly, modern dating's worst embarrassment, texting the wrong emoji, feels refreshingly trivial. Grateful your romantic failures won't inspire warfare or require ceremonial apologies. You leave the samurai speed dating event relieved. Your biggest dating worry might be matching socks, not defending family honor through poetic duels or pigeon diplomacy. As the tea cools and the ceremony ends, you slip quietly back into the comforting simplicity of the modern era, vowing never again to complain about awkward first dates. Suddenly, you're transported to ancient Mexico City, standing nervously at the edge of an Aztec love ritual, clutching a bowl filled with a dubious concoction. You've got chocolate, chili, and yes, hallucinogenic mushrooms, which the Aztecs believed could ignite true passion. Clearly, Nothing says romance like spicy, mind-altering fungi that might make you mistake your partner for a talking cactus. You watch cautiously as couples gather to dance, their intricate movements carefully choreographed, because a single wrong step might signify eternal singlehood or worse, public embarrassment. Aztec romance wasn't a casual affair. Historians still debate whether these complex rituals genuinely expressed deep spiritual beliefs or were simply a clever form of ancient entertainment at the expense of nervous singles. Nearby, a young man is frantically practicing his moves, worried one misstep might ruin his chances. He accidentally steps on a turkey's tail feathers, causing it to panic and run wildly through the crowd, scattering dancers and knocking over ceremonial vessels. Suddenly, romantic intentions dissolve into chaos, with participants slipping on spilled chocolate and dodging an outraged turkey. This, it turns out, isn't a rare event. Historical records mention similar animal interruptions with comical regularity. Despite the turkey disaster, couples bravely persist in sipping potions and reciting heartfelt poetry, though the hallucinogenic mushrooms likely help ease any embarrassment. Aztec poetry, by the way, commonly invoked cosmic imagery, intense passion, and occasionally vivid descriptions of human hearts, both symbolic and distressingly literal. Romance, it seems, often blurred uncomfortably with sacrifice-themed metaphors. You find yourself suddenly grateful for modern dating apps. Sure, swiping left repeatedly can bruise your ego, but at least you're not ingesting hallucinogens and dancing precariously near hysterical poultry. You're fairly certain dating has improved simply because no one in the modern era expects you to trip over a turkey or offer your romantic interest mushrooms with questionable side effects. As the dance winds down and the turkey is finally calmed, participants nervously glance around, hoping their chaotic display hasn't doomed their romantic futures. But you sense, deep down, Aztec singles probably found the ridiculousness of these rituals just as humorous as you do once the mushroom effects wore off. Feeling deeply relieved that your modern romantic disasters involve neither livestock stampedes nor questionable fungi, you quietly slip away from the Aztec festivities. You leave grateful your worst date probably involves stale conversation and not angry poultry, hallucinations, or complex choreography designed to humiliate anyone with poor coordination. You find yourself abruptly transported to revolutionary France, wandering the cobbled streets amid a time when romance isn't just risky, it's potentially fatal. Forget chocolates and roses. Here, romantic declarations often come scribbled hastily on scraps of paper smuggled from prison cells. Nothing quite fans the flames of passion like imminent execution. You'd think the constant threat of losing one's head literally would dampen romantic enthusiasm. Yet strangely, it seemed to heighten it. Or at least, it made declarations of love sound dramatically sincere. You stumble across hastily printed dating profiles tacked to tavern walls, seeking partners who could either navigate political turmoil or had a sturdy neck resistant to the guillotine's charms. Seeking sturdy revolutionary partner, one reads, preferably able to withstand occasional imprisonment and regular government overthrow. Historians still argue whether these revolutionary-era marriages were born from desperate passion or simply the practical desire to stay alive. One notorious historical event featured an ambitious young revolutionary named Pierre, who boldly decided to propose marriage in the shadow of the guillotine, dramatic timing at its finest, just as he knelt down to declare eternal love. However, his heartfelt moment was rudely interrupted by officials marching the unfortunate groom-to-be directly onto the execution platform. Nothing deflates romantic ambitions quicker than the sudden loss of your head or your fiancé's. Amid all this chaos, courtship involves secret codes and whispered conversations behind shuttered windows, where expressing love openly could easily result in arrest. French Revolutionary romance required the careful balance of passion and paranoia. "I would die for you" was less poetic exaggeration and more of a realistic risk assessment. In these tumultuous times, courtship was undeniably rushed, with marriage proposals often made within hours of meeting after all. Who knew if tomorrow would even arrive? Modern complaints about commitment-phobic partners suddenly feel trivial compared to navigating romance amidst constant governmental purges, as you carefully tiptoe around revolutionary fervor, stepping over discarded pamphlets and trying to avoid eye contact with suspicious guards. You realize your dating disasters, ghosting, awkward texts, and bad coffee shop dates aren't so bad. At least modern love rarely involves life or death stakes or executioners waiting patiently in the wings. Feeling profound relief, you quietly retreat from revolutionary France, grateful your modern romantic troubles mostly involve unread messages or unreturned calls, rather than whispered marriage proposals interrupted by executioners. As you slip away, you're thankful your head and heart are safely intact. You're now jolted into the rowdy, dusty chaos of the Wild West. Right in the middle of a wedding that generously qualifies as organized mayhem. Forget elegant bouquets or refined vows here. A ceremony's success depends largely on preventing the groom from accidentally shooting his toes off or losing track of his horse. You shuffle through the raucous crowd, noticing cowboys trying desperately to impress potential partners by loudly recounting heroic tales usually involving cattle stampedes or getting lost in the desert. Love stories here have a strange pattern. Met on Monday, proposed on Tuesday, married by Wednesday, and survived a tornado together by Friday. Historians still debate whether marriages in the Wild West were genuinely about affection or simply about merging land, herds of cattle, and survival skills. But tonight, practicality seems the least of anyone's concerns. You spot the groom, clearly intoxicated from moonshine, attempting to saddle his bride instead of his horse, loudly arguing that his fiancée's mane is particularly soft tonight. She, equally inebriated, finds this hilarious rather than insulting true Wild West romance. Nearby, another cowboy proudly boasts of his romantic qualifications, including an alarming skill at accidentally losing cattle and once surviving 3 snake bites in a single week, truly irresistible qualities. You quietly wonder how anyone could find romance amid such a mix of danger and slapstick absurdity. But here, love apparently thrives on near-death experiences and questionable life decisions. As the wedding ceremony unfolds, vows are exchanged amid the sound of gunshots intended as celebratory but occasionally causing guests to duck and panic. Nothing enhances the atmosphere of romance like firearms and alcohol. Apparently, you're relieved modern weddings, despite their occasional chaos, rarely involve dodging bullets or confusing your future spouse with livestock. Finally, as the evening fades, you witness one last chaotic scene. The groom triumphantly lifts his bride onto his horse, correctly identified this time, before riding heroically off toward the sunset. Unfortunately, neither of them notices they're riding in the wrong direction, straight into a cactus-filled valley. Guests wave cheerfully, confident the newlyweds will eventually find their way, or at least enjoy a memorable honeymoon. As your journey through history's laughably misguided romances finally concludes, your eyes grow heavy. You relax, comforted by the gentle realization that your modern-day romantic challenges are wonderfully mundane by comparison. After all, your biggest worry might be awkward goodnight texts, or forgetting your anniversary, not stampeding cattle, crocodile dung, eyeliner, or misplaced guillotines. So, breathe deeply, knowing love's absurdities have existed forever, yet somehow humanity survives, even thrives on laughter, born from its endless romantic missteps. Close your eyes, let the ridiculous stories fade, and rest assured love is always messy, hilariously unpredictable, but beautifully human. Sleep well, Dear listener, safe in the soft embrace of modern romance's comforting ordinariness.